Hey, welcome. Today we're going to pull back the curtain on one of the most powerful but kinda invisible forces in your financial life. We're talking about a money dial that basically controls everything from your savings rate to the cost of a new car.
You know that feeling like the financial goalposts are just constantly moving on you? One month, savings seems to be going great. The next, bam, your credit card interest is creeping up, and it feels like prices for everything are just going through the roof. If that sounds familiar, you are definitely not alone. It's something we all deal with.
But what if I told you these things, they're not random at all? What if they're all connected to a single central control knob, a master dial for the entire country's money supply? Which, of course, leads to the big question: who's in charge of turning it?
All right, so who is behind this thing? Who are the operators controlling this incredibly powerful dial? Let's pull back the curtain and meet them.
Okay, so this is basically the nerve center of the entire U.S. economy. The operators are a group called the Federal Open Market Committee, or FOMC, which is, a bit of a mouthful. They're the main decision-making group inside the U.S. central bank, which you probably just know as the Fed. It is right here that a small group of people make choices that send ripples through everyone's financial life. So, what are their marching orders? What's the rule book they have to follow? Well, it's something called the dual mandate. Congress literally passed a law that gives the Fed two main jobs. First, keep as many people employed as possible. Second, keep prices stable and predictable. And this is where it gets really, really tricky. A lot of the time, those two goals are pulling in completely opposite directions.
And believe me, that balancing act gets way harder when politics enters the room. The Fed is supposed to be independent, but that has never stopped presidents from trying to nudge them one way or the other. I mean, check this out. This is from a secret recording of President Nixon. He's basically leaning on the Fed chairman to keep the economy juiced up just so he can get reelected.
Okay, so how do they actually do it? How do they manage this balancing act? Let's start with what happens when they decide things are getting a little too hot and they need to turn that money dial up.
This right here is probably one of the most famous sayings in all of finance. And you gotta ask, right? Why would anyone want to be the person who takes away the punch bowl just as the party's getting good? Well, in economic terms, a party that gets way too out of control is runaway inflation. That's when prices spiral and every single dollar you've saved starts to lose its value fast. The Fed's job is to be the responsible one.
Well, the official, kind of boring name for taking away the punch bowl is contractionary policy. The main tool the Fed uses is raising its key interest rate. It's called the federal funds rate. By turning this dial up, they are deliberately making it more expensive for everybody, businesses, you, me, to borrow money.
So here's the chain reaction step by step. The Fed says we're hiking rates. Right away, it costs more for banks to borrow money. So what do the banks do? They pass that cost on to us. So when we're faced with more expensive debt, higher mortgage payments, higher credit card interest, we all tend to pull back and spend less. That collective slowdown is exactly what cools off the economy and gets inflation under control.
Okay, but what about the opposite problem? What if the economy isn't a wild party, but more like it's sluggish, it's sputtering, it's just not getting going? Well, that's when the Fed turns the dial the other way. This, you guessed it, is called expansionary policy. When the economy is weak or even in a recession, the Fed switches its focus to that other part of its job, boosting employment. And to do that, they have to get people spending and investing again by turning the dial down and making money cheap.
And it works pretty much the same way, just in reverse. The Fed cuts its rate, so it's cheaper for banks to borrow. The banks then start offering lower interest rates on all kinds of loans. And when money is cheap, businesses are way more likely to expand and hire new people, and we're more likely to go out and make those big purchases, like a new car or a house. All of that injects a big jolt of energy back into the economy.
Okay, so this is the real million-dollar question, right? How does a decision made by a handful of people in a boardroom in Washington, D.C. actually end up changing the numbers you see on your bank statement? How does that signal get from them to you? Well, there's a fancy term for it. Economists call it the transmission mechanism. But really, just think of it like a series of dominoes tipping over, starting with the Fed's decision and ending right in your wallet. So the first domino is the Fed's policy rate. That rate immediately sets the price for what banks charge each other for super short-term loans.
that cost becomes the foundation for everything else. And from there, it just ripples out almost instantly, hitting your mortgage, your car loan, your credit cards, all of it. And yeah, that includes the rate you earn in your savings account too. But wait, there's a really important catch here we have to talk about. The rate you see advertised, that's the nominal rate. It doesn't tell the whole story. To really get what's happening with your money, you have to subtract inflation. That gives you the real rate. So let's say your savings account is paying you 3%. That sounds okay, right? But if inflation is at 4%, meaning prices for everything are going up by 4%, you're actually going backwards. You're losing 1% of your spending power every single year. Your money is literally worth less.
So, look, understanding what the Fed is doing with this giant money dial is super powerful. But that's not the whole story. Because while they control the big dial for the whole economy, you have your own dials.
And I absolutely love this idea. Your personal money dials are all about being intentional. It's about deciding what you absolutely love spending money on. Maybe it's travel, maybe it's amazing food, maybe it's the latest tech. And then giving yourself permission to spend big on that, while just being ruthless about cutting costs on stuff you couldn't care less about.
And really, that's the bottom line here. You and I, we can't control the Fed. We can't tell them what to do. They're going to change the financial weather, whether we like it or not. But if we understand what they're doing and why, we can be so much smarter about how we navigate it. We can adjust our own dials to match the conditions. So that's the question I want to leave you with. Now that you know who's controlling that big dial, and more importantly, why they're turning it, how is that going to change the way you set your own? Something to think about. Thanks for tuning in.